Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, nice to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well, and we have a little bit of good news. We at least are hoping it's good news because we're quoting our president,
Yes.
and he said some good things about Iraq, and we're pulling for him if he could just translate that into the foreign policy. But he was at a fundraiser, his own fundraiser. He's, running for office again. He's setting up his campaign. So that was in Florida, and it was supposed to be a private meeting, but lo and behold, the speeches got out, some another, and there's reports on what he said. So the subject of Iraq came up. And it's similar to what he has said before, that Iraq was a big mistake. It was the stupidest thing Bush ever did, and it is said that that's one of the reasons the Bushes split from Trump and wouldn't support him, and that may well be true. But the big challenge for us is to take a look at what he said there, that it was a stupid mistake. At the same time, he's pursuing other countries almost in a similar manner, that we're interventionists and we have troops there, and of course we've talked about that a lot. So I found it pretty fascinating. And one thing that I think we should look at is it was a supposedly secret meeting. He was speaking more or less from what he really believed, and maybe he is there. But the big question is how do we get more Americans to agree to put pressure on him to practice what he preaches? If he thinks it was a mistake to be messing around in Iraq, maybe it's a mistake to be messing around in Syria and a few other places.
It makes you wonder what he's thinking, because he's almost schizophrenic. He'll say one thing one day and one thing the other day, and we've talked about this for at least a year or so. But it was in his resort down there in Mar-a-Lago, and he said, "Here we are, the dummies of the world, because we've had bad politicians running our country for a long time." I don't think many of us would disagree with that. As you point out, he said invading Iraq was, quote, "the single worst decision ever made. It amounted to, quote, throwing a brick into a hornet's nest." But the question is right, so then why do you keep throwing that brick back in? Why do you stay in? It's a good question.
And he also mocked the intelligence services that were providing information to the CIA back then, which means that we ought to be still looking at the CIA and all this shenanigans going on in FISA courts and investigation of Russia and all these things. We still haven't cleaned up that mess, and I think that we have too many agencies looking at too many things in a policy that we shouldn't have. But certainly he rightfully criticized the CIA because they were just, the people who supported it, and some of the congressmen, I remember well, they went to briefings and, well, the CIA's top secret briefing, these guys are bad guys, and painted this horrible picture of Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, they did. But the thing is, he misses the main point here. And here's the quote that you were talking about. He said, talking to the crowd there on Saturday, "That was Bush, another real genius. That turned out to be wonderful intelligence, a great intelligence agency there." But what I think he misunderstands, and this is a fatal flaw in his understanding of what happened, is that it wasn't the intelligence agencies that failed as such. What it was is that the intelligence was manipulated. Someone actively came in and did something they knew was incorrect to manipulate the intelligence to show a certain outcome. Those somebodies were called neocons. That's what they did, and we have from Karen Kwiatkowski and many people who were there at the Pentagon at the time. They saw it happening. They saw what they were doing. So it wasn't that our intel was bad. That's, oh gosh, we made a mistake. It's a bad one. But no, it was something very different. It was manipulated, and it's being manipulated now by the same neocons. The difference is that they're still around him.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, they were very successful in getting the people riled up, because the people initially didn't want to have this war, and they finally got convinced that Saddam Hussein had the weapons of mass destruction, and Al-Qaeda was involved, and he was involved with 9/11, and there was no Al-Qaeda there, and yet even now after these 15 years, Al-Qaeda is there.
Yeah.
The whole thing is just backwards on what it is. But I believe I saw a statistic not too long ago where a significant number of American people still believe that Saddam Hussein had some responsibility with Al-Qaeda. So it's a very effective tool that they have for war propaganda. It's the government that ends up doing it, and it's the media, and the politicians fall in line too, especially the ones who want to promote the lies, and also the others who seek out the truth and get told by a intelligence agency, and they want to trust the intelligence agency, and they go along with that. So it's a real shame that it's so hard to get the truth out, and the falsehood lingers for so much longer, and that's how we get involved in these things. But the one thing is when the average American now looks back, the large majority, although they're confused on the history, the large majority don't look up to the Bush administration and the wars. They don't say, oh, that was a wonderful war and we saved the world and we gave liberty back to the Iraqi people. You never hear that. And I think that's healthy that people are starting to analyze this in a more objective manner.
And now we're looking at 15 years since the beginning of the war. On March 20th was that opening day of shock and awe. But as you say, it was based on lies. It was based on active lies. The Al-Qaeda connection, which is false. The aluminum tubes. Oh, this is precursors to rockets. They're going to shoot rockets at us. Totally false. Mohammed Atta, one of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks, he met with the Iraqi intelligence in Eastern Europe. A total false. What about Judith Miller, the writer, the journalist, who day after day was churning out lies? She had a direct pipeline to the neocons in the Pentagon, churning out lies. She's still a journalist. She's now an expert for Fox News.
Right.
You know?
And that is always the problem on who's always involved in this propaganda, and there's quite a few different groups for different reasons. We have, I don't believe yet, mentioned the whole fact that there's oil in that region too, and oil is a big thing, and there's many other countries involved, and here we go, and the American people sit back and we go 6,000 miles away to get involved in a senseless war and all the tragedies and all the people who have suffered and continue to suffer, the people coming back suffering from all these diseases, and we still have the epidemic of suicide from the military that had to be engaged in these kind of wars. So the cost goes on, and yet policies don't change. It's great that Trump has said this, but it would be even greater if he could take this and extrapolate this to a foreign policy that makes sense. If that was stupid and they can't understand it, it was totally worthless and based on lies, why don't they look at all the other things that have been going on since then, all the things that happened with Obama, and it continues to happen. There's too much engagement. You know, we haven't left Afghanistan yet. You know, we continue to make the same mistakes.
You know, for many years you've talked about the executive branch being too strong, taking over authority from the legislative branch. It should be it's overstepping its bounds. But ironically, in this case, it almost seems like the chief executive, the executive branch, is too weak. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces when they're out in the field. He says we shouldn't be in Iraq. It's a bad thing. He says we need to go in Syria, take ISIS, and get out. He just a couple of weeks ago, he said we've got to get out. Well, you're the guy in charge. Stop tweeting about it. Call somebody up and say, okay, fire up the trucks, we're coming home. It's not that hard.
Sometimes I look at this as an issue of how much strength the executive branch has and the president. And to me, the other issue is, if you're strong, what are you strong for? Are you strong for war, or are you strong for peace? Yeah. But what happens is, if you're strong for peace, you're weak and a wimp and not patriotic. At the same time, being strong for war is generally what history's shown people like that. And even Bush, I remember when he became president, you know, to really be a great all great presidents have had a war to fight, and that's insanity. And that sits in these guys' minds, and they think it's all a benefit because they're going to remake the Middle East, and then those neocons come along with this philosophy. It's our moral responsibility, and they play it up in high tones of patriotism and American greatness. and too much go along. This is why I stick to my position that they have so much power and influence, and they're getting away with this, that the weakness is going to be the financing. And this is why, if you look to history, it's the financing of this aggressive foreign policy and this empire building and maintenance that finally brings it down. And I think we're losing credibility. I think our debt is dangerously high. And therefore, we have to look for the opening and keep pursuing what a non-interventionist foreign policy looks like. But I don't think that, unfortunately, I hope, but I don't think President Trump next week will say, that is a pretty good point those guys are making.
I like that show.
He said, yeah, they agree with me. So we're getting out of Syria tomorrow. We're leaving. We're not going to be involved with the Kurds and the Turks and the Russians or anybody else. We're just leaving. We're coming home, and that would really get me excited if we're true.
And on the economic front, you say that that's how it's going to come down. It doesn't, we spent how many trillions of dollars between Iraq and Afghanistan? Quite a bit. But the average American hasn't felt that loss. Like if you lose $100, you're going to run through your house looking for the money. At least I would. $20, I would. But Americans haven't felt that loss. What do you think how will they perceive that $1 trillion has gone missing?
Well, there is no real cost in reality, because we pay for all this with counterfeit money. And we are the official worldwide counterfeiters. Essentially, that's what happens if you can issue the gold. In the old days, you had to have gold, and you either had to steal it or work for it. But today, they don't deal with that. They deal with the fiat currency, which is the dollar. And as long as people take it, they will keep us propped up. But that's what is starting to shake. And it looks like the support, for the dollar is on shaky ground. So I think it's going to continue, and the support will be there because it's the almighty dollar, but it will end. It always does, and that's why it's important for us to try to prepare and lead the way to say that there is another option. And we didn't invent this position. It's been talked about for years. It's been tested in history. It certainly was tested by our earlier history. We weren't going 6,000 miles away to fight a battle. Matter of fact, we were advised early on, stay out of the affairs of the Europeans. Just stay out of it. Too bad they thought it was quite all right to go to Central America or someplace else. But basically, the founders made statements of non-entangling alliances. Stay out of these affairs and defend the country, but not to go looking for a fight. Don't go around the world looking for monsters to destroy. And that's essentially what we do. We have to always have an enemy. We always have to have a Hitler out there. And if he's not really a true blue Hitler, we'll turn him into Hitler. And we've done that. Syria is a mess, and certainly we wouldn't have praised Assad's regime and the Syrians for the libertarian state ever. But to turn, against Assad and make it sound like he's worse than Hitler and Stalin combined, and therefore we have to go in and do what we've done to get rid of Assad. See, that's too far removed, and the best way you deal with dictators is that you try to deal with the people and try to influence them with different ideas rather than fighting and bombing and putting on sanctions and threatening them. I don't think that works.
Yeah. And your column this week, which is up at the Ron Paul Institute website, ronpaulinstitute.org, you mentioned someone talk about people who have not been punished in any way, shape, or form for arguing in favor of this disastrous war. Lindsey Graham, the senator for South Carolina, he was on over the weekend. He said, well, I think it's a good idea to invade North Korea. And this is the ironic thing. He echoed Madeleine Albright when he says, I think it'll be worth it. Remember what she said about the death of those 500,000 kids? He sounded just like her.
Yeah, when I saw it'll be worth it. It's like a trade-off. How many lives can we give for the change of policy? I remember when we were leading up to the war in Iraq, I actually asked one of the neocons that was presenting the case for that, I mean, how many lives are you willing to give up to have what you want? And of course, he wouldn't answer, and of course, it wasn't going to be many lives lost. And I said, "Will you, if you go for 5 years and you lose this many lives, will you change your mind?" Of course, they're not going to answer that. I always assumed it'd be worse than they said, but I was, actually never thought it would get as bad as I was claiming. This is what you should be thinking of.
I remember that hearing. We won't say who it was, but anyway, I think we've pretty much talked about our pro Trump show for the week.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that we can continue with the positives.
We'd like to praise him. Keep doing good things.
Right.
But I'd like to remind everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ron Paul Liberty Report. Since we've been asking you, we've got a bump in subscribers, so we're very happy about that. We'd like to get our message, get around, send it around to your friends and your enemies, and let them know that there is an alternative news site.
Wonderful. And talking about the media, they work real hard to promote the war, and they've been that way for a long, long time. But I don't remember seeing anything on the TV over the weekend about this little episode. And they have it out there. If it's on the internet, the information got out. And this would be a great story to tell. This is what Trump is all about. Why isn't he doing more of this? No, they squelch this. Maybe he does believe this. And how are we going to get him to respond, to the planners, the dictates? How are we going to get Kissinger to be the messenger and tell him what he ought to do? This is the big thing, and I'm going to continue to talk and try to figure out and understand exactly how the deep state works. Because I don't believe it's a monolith. I don't think there's 5 or 10 people who get together and they get the marching orders. But there's maybe 5 or 10 special interest groups that have a goal, which is influencing the government for financial reasons and for neocon intervention overseas and for the various reasons. But they come together. But unfortunately, one thing that they agree on is world government, as long as they're in charge. And I want a lot less government. I want to diminish government. I want to have local government. So it's the opposite of world government. And that means responsibility falls with the individual. So that's a big difference. And I hope and pray that we move toward that day where we will emphasize the importance of liberty rather than saying that the government is going to take care of us and we need more wars because they're worth it. Obviously, that's ridiculous. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.